Hi, welcome. Today we're going to be talking about the various aspects of mutes in string playing. This video is going to be divided into three different sections: notation, logistics, and timbral effect. Because, spoiler alert, using a mute doesn't just make the strings quieter. So if any of those are of particular interest to you, there will be timestamps in the description, and so you can go look for any of those parts that you'd like to. All right, so to get this out of the way, we're going to start with the most basic element of all of this, which is notation. To indicate that you want the player to put their mute on, write consord in technique text above the staff. Then when you want them to remove it, write Senza sword. When nothing is written, string players will default to unmuted playing, so there's no need to mark anything at the beginning of the score if you want them to play normally. If you're in a situation where you've ended a movement consord and you want to start the next movement unmuted, then you could probably get away with not marking anything, but it might be nice to have a parenthetical Senza sword either at the end of the former movement or at the beginning of the latter, just to be totally safe. If you've already muted your players, don't restate consort unless it's in parentheses, because your players will assume that you've made a mistake and forgotten to write Senza sword somewhere, and then time will be wasted with questions that don't need to be asked. All right, now let's talk about the logistics. Most string players either have a rubber or wooden mute. I happen to have a rubber one just because I like how easily accessible it is. It rests right here behind the bridge on my D string, which makes it so that I can change it quicker than I could if I had a wooden one. Players with wooden mutes usually set them on their stand in an unobtrusive location, and some people prefer the sound of the wooden ones, but obviously the drawback is that quick changes are slightly more difficult. If you're a composer or orchestrator or arranger, the type of mute that the player uses is actually not your decision the way that it would be with brass instruments. The only exception to this would be if you're working with a specific individual or group and they know that you want to explore various different mute types with them in whatever piece you're writing for them. Now, this might be cynical, but I really don't think that indicating specific kinds of mutes is going to go over very well in an orchestra, and to be honest, it's really not going to make that much of a difference, so don't worry about it. The whole point of me telling you about this is so that you understand that it takes a non-zero amount of time to switch between muted and unmuted playing. So the best way to do mute changes is when you have a few rests for the players to do that, but if there's a bit that's absolutely vital for you to have a mute change in without any rests, just be aware that the players are either going to have to stagger the mute changes among themselves, or they're all going to try and do the change early. If you're working in a solo or chamber setting, a mute change without a couple of rests is just not going to happen, since solo and chamber players don't have sections to cover up staggered changes. So you really need to give players even just a second or two to perform a mute change. Like, seriously, if there's only one thing you take away from this video today, let it be that. Alright, so obviously putting a mute on an instrument makes it quieter, but it also suppresses the higher overtones of the instrument, which means that it also changes its timbre. It can be a much thinner and icier sound when playing quietly, and when playing at a moderate volume, it can come off slightly more nasally and suppressed. Now, there are a number of ways you can manipulate the overtones of string instruments, for example, solpanicello and soltasto, but almost all of these things involve something to do with the bow, and this is why muting can be really nice. You can basically do any kind of string writing with a mute on and still have the freedom of the bow to do whatever it wants. One of my favorite examples of this is writing forte or fortissimo passages that are also muted. Check out this small bit from Britten's second string quartet. It's a super unique timbre, and I wish composers would take advantage of it more often. By the way, I would definitely recommend just checking out that entire piece. It's really cool. Now, while writing the script, I couldn't actually think of an orchestral example of this forte, fortissimo muted writing, so if you know one, feel free to leave it in the comments. Now, all of this is to say that there are a number of aesthetics to explore with mutes. They're good for so much more than just slow, quiet stuff, although they can be great for that. So that's that. As always, check the description for links to examples of various uses of mutes in the repertoire. And if you're not already subscribed, please consider doing so. I have a current goal of hitting 800 by August 1st. So if you found this video helpful, that would be super awesome if you could help me out with that. Let me know if you have any questions or thoughts about mute-related items in the comments, and have a great rest of your day.